Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Mustafa Hassan, who is the ultrasound market analyst for Signify Research, making him one of the foremost experts in the ultrasound market globally. He has a PhD in neurophysiology, is an astute thought leader in medical imaging, and has the most wonderful English accent you've ever heard. Mustafa, before we dive deep into the episode, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, thank you for the warm introduction. Yeah, I'm Mustafa Hassan, market analyst at Signify Research. So before I joined Signify, I was originally in academia. So as you mentioned, I did my PhD in neurophysiology, where I looked at the activity of sort of cells in the brain and how it affects your what's called your circadian rhythms or your bodily functions. Doing post that, I did a postdoc. Again, look at activity of cells, but this time in the heart. And then I kind of wanted to transition away from sort of the contract academic life into something a bit more permanent. And so I was looking around for career opportunities. And then I came across the opportunity to be the market analyst for ultrasound at Signify. And I've been here just over 3 years now.
Very interesting. And so I'd love to dive a bit deeper into your academic background, kind of what attracted you to the space. And it sounds like, as typical with academia, like you kind of get more and more specific the deeper and deeper you get into your education. So what kind of drove you into neurophysiology?
So during my degree, once it finished, there was two aspects of my degree that I really enjoyed that I wanted to pursue post my bachelor's degree. One was the study of circadian rhythms, which during the lectures, I didn't find it that engaging, but then it was during the revision for the final exams where I was really fascinated by it. And the other one was a branch of science called electrophysiology, which is the study of cells or the activity of cells. So as an example, for diseases like cystic fibrosis, that's the disease caused by the dysregulation of activity of what's called ion channels in cells. So they're basically doors that allow ions in and out of your cells. I did that for a year during my degree as an industry placement year. So I kind of wanted something that did one or the other. And then I came across the PhD that did both. But I was also open, I was very open with my career path as well. I was very open to what the possibilities that were out there. I wasn't necessarily stuck on a specific path, but, I found this opportunity of, this is great. Really enjoyed the PhD. And again, afterwards, I really found, the opportunity to do the postdoc, gravitated towards that. It was really towards the end of my postdoc where I had to make a definitive decision as to what I wanted to do with my career. Whereas I wanted a permanent position and things like that more, which is what led me to Signify Research.
Yeah, maybe at some level you have kind of the best of both worlds. You have the opportunity to really zoom in like you would in academia. And it strikes me that as a market analyst, you also have to have a very, very broad lens, right, to be able to step back and kind of think about all of the macro trends affecting the specific space that you're researching. Maybe talk to me about that, about like the ability to vacillate between like zooming in on a very, very specific topic, kind of leveraging a lot of your academic ability to focus and get extremely precise, coupled with the ability to step back and kind of see what's happening at large and what are the big things that are impacting this microcosm that I'm focused on.
Yeah, but that was one of the great things about having the opportunity to work at Signify Research, because it was in academia. The project is obviously quite large and you're doing a very specific part of it. So, the day-to-day things, you almost don't feel like you're making much of a difference, even though, when you look at it as a whole, you are. But I didn't really have that viewpoint from when I was in academia. Yeah, so it's great at Signify Research because, as well as the reports that I work on are all global. So we cover 30 different regions and countries. We cover also like around 30 clinical applications as well, across the 5 main ones. So it's really fascinating just to dive into each specific clinical application, and which, they vary so much in between them. So, I can be looking at the cardiology, sort of interventional market, and then looking at each of the individual point of care markets and really analyze those. But then I have the opportunity to take a step back and see, what are the overall arching trends? How does the trends in one area impact the overall market? How do they compete? And then what I also enjoy is obviously when we produce the reports, customers purchase them, we get to work with them as well. And feel like you make much more of an impact as to sort of the work that you're doing is helping our customers with their strategy planning and their own forecasting. Yeah, whilst also remaining in a somewhat scientific field.
Well, I can definitely attest to the utility of that. As an operator, actually, my whole career, I've always been consuming various industry reports, and certainly Signify has been across various roles, various companies that I've worked at, has been an important partner of just being able to provide that context that sometimes you lack as an operator because you're sitting and seeing things, from your small niche and small kind of neck of the woods. I'm curious, what does the day-to-day of a market analyst look like? Like you wake up in the morning and do what to learn about ultrasound?
So at Signify, for ultrasound, we have at the moment what's called the Market Intelligence Service. So we produce various reports throughout the year on different aspects of the market. So the day-to-day is really driven by what project you're working on at the same time. So that obviously depends what specific project you're working on, what specific research you're doing. But generally it's, in terms of the research process, it doesn't vary that much. So away from the research itself, where following the latest news releases, we keep log of all of those that's happening. We attend the major industry trade show conferences to keep up to date with the latest each vendors are doing. But in terms of the research process for our reports, a lot of it is actually speaking to the vendors themselves. What makes us really appealing to purchase our reports from for vendors is that whilst vendors can look at the market from their own viewscape, so they know how the market might be doing from their perspective, by us speaking to all of the vendors, we try to schedule over 30 qualitative market discussions for each report. And so by speaking to, as many vendors as we can, we sort of get a viewpoint of how every vendor sees the market. So that allows us to collate all that information together to really find out the real trends that are driving the markets.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can definitely see that from where I sit, that you're offering a very well-rounded, very vendor-neutral view. Let's dive into ultrasound itself. And as you know, we're in the handheld ultrasound space today. What's your general outlook on handheld ultrasound? It's this kind of newer technology that's come in and trying to disrupt quite an established and legacy market of carts and compacts. So what's your kind of high-level view on the space?
The impact handheld ultrasound is having on the market is not actually that dissimilar to when the compact systems first started to enter the market. It entered, people think, these are going to replace carts systems. And for a while, people thought, there was a debate whether it would. But in what actually happens is that the compact market developed its own part of the market, its own niche area. Some overlap with carts, but mostly they're quite separate. And handheld is, I would say, it's the next step along from that. So it's the new technology. People are asking the question, will it replace carts? And I think the trend will be similar to what we saw with the compacts. To some extent, it will replace it in some areas, where there's some overlap. But I think what we're increasingly seeing now is handheld markets developing sort of their own marketplace, their own specific user groups. We'll sort of see that more continuing in the coming years as the adoption of handheld, which is still ongoing, it's still developing. I don't think it's reached mainstream adoption yet, but as it does become more mainstream, we'll then start to see more and more user groups which will be more distinct from users of compact ultrasound systems.
Yeah, I'd love to unpack that point a little further because, usually we think of disruption in conventional terms, meaning there's legacy systems that are, established higher end, higher cost. And then over time, new entrants come in, they're lower cost. At first, their quality is not as good. Over time, quality improves. And on kind of an ongoing basis, they disintermediate and cannibalize the existing legacy business of the established vendors. It sounds like you're saying from kind of seeing now two turns of ultrasound, first going from carts to compacts and now from compacts to handhelds, you're seeing there's some disintermediation, but most of what you're seeing, if I can paraphrase, sounds like is an expansion of the TAM actually, is that the new technology coming in is creating a new market that serves new users that weren't using the legacy technology. Maybe more on the periphery, you are seeing some more replacement dynamics. Is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, no, that's very accurate. Yeah, so I don't think there'll be a complete replacement because in terms of the image quality, whilst it's improved for handheld and just the technology within handheld ultrasound in general, comparing it to say a premium compact or even cart-based systems, there are still differences there. So there's still, there's only so much you can pack into a handheld ultrasound device. So there'll be certain use cases where just based on the technical features alone, you may want a bigger system, especially if ultra portability is not really an issue for you. If you're happy if you don't need to use it on the go, apart from the price, and you're happy to spend the money, then people may opt for some of the bigger ultrasound systems. But where you will see handheld ultrasound used a lot more is for those users who would use them on the go, who maybe at the moment don't traditionally use ultrasound because they're not able to carry around a compact system all day. A good example would be nurses. You're doing their rounds easily with a handheld ultrasound scanner. It would be very easy to scan the patients as you do your rounds. But if they wouldn't be able to do that with a compact ultrasound system. New users such as nurses, with the introduction of handheld ultrasound, it become much more feasible for them to use the imaging modality. And so that's how the market will expand.
Yeah, my view is that it's really dependent, to your point, Mustafa, on clinical specialty, right? And so in clinical specialty is that, all the advantages of a cart are well established, meaning you don't need the portability, you need superior image quality. And I think also in areas where you already have a sonographer, those clinical specialty areas are really well entrenched with carts, and I think will likely continue to use them because it is the best high-end solution. And I think most importantly, if you have the resources to leverage it, which is principally a sonographer, then you're going to see, I think, little movement there. And that's probably radiology, cardiology, obstetrics. We've seen them really stable, I think, in terms of adoption. Kind of in the middle, you have a lot of the point of care segments where I think my clinical application, we're probably seeing some variability where the market is bifurcating. Again, this is just my view, but we're seeing that, the compacts are either becoming higher end and are challenging the carts, or that the users are seeking more handhelds because they favor the portability, they favor maybe the workflow. They also are not reliant on sonographers, and therefore it's the actual point of care user, either for an intervention or for a diagnosis, that is using the product. And that's, I think, is replacing some of the lower end and get mid-tier compacts. So maybe the compact market is bifurcating and we're seeing gravitational pull towards the upper end, and to the lower end, maybe the middle part of compacts is kind of separating and starting to move to one of those polar opposites. Is that, do you see that at all? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And even if you look at some of the new compact product introductions there, the systems are quite a lot larger than traditional compact systems. They're almost becoming increasingly bigger and bigger and more like cart-based system. And you're even seeing now, maybe in response to that, certain new cart-based product introductions. I'm sure there are many reasons for this, but one of the new features they're introducing is the portability of the systems. Some cart-based systems now can be battery powered for up to 75 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And they have wireless transducers now. Yeah, no, that makes sense. If I think about handheld, I really kind of think about it as there's, bottom up and top down drivers. Bottom up, as you discussed, is novice users that never had access to imaging, maybe never thought imaging could come into their, standard of care or into their clinical practice. And now are getting access to it because of the lower price point, the portability, wireless capabilities, and increasingly, I think handheld is more prone to leveraging AI than maybe legacy cart or compact systems. And AI, I think, forcing kind of reducing the hurdle rate for novice users. That's kind of the bottom up market. And then in certain clinical domains where, where image quality maybe is good enough on the handhelds, you are seeing a chip away at replacements of compacts. And maybe again, that's reflective of what you noted, is that the compacts are investing more in high-end systems, bigger compacts. Versus, maybe giving up some of the low end or mid-tier compact market to replacements by handheld. So that's kind of from where we sit. I think that's some of the dynamics we're seeing, is that kind of mix of bottom up growth of the TAM and top down replacements of legacy areas where carts and mostly compacts were being used.
Yeah. And in terms of, I'm actually really excited in terms of when looking at the handheld ultrasound market, is along the lines of the total addressable market, where it is now, where it could be, as in the potential of user groups that could end up using it. So I mentioned nurses, but even expanding into, the home ultrasound market, which I think obviously is still some way away, but it's quite exciting to see how that market will develop. And I believe, that's what's prompting a lot of interest in handheld ultrasound from sort of the multi-product vendors. They have their handheld ultrasound devices, which they commonly sell to hospital groups as, in combination with their other products. But I believe they're also looking to try and sort of establish that user base with the new groups, sort of have a footing in there. So as these new users start to use it more and more, depending on what their capabilities are as to what they want from an ultrasound system, they're there to meet and supply their needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said something interesting, which is that ultrasound ultimately can get to the home. It strikes me that the biggest barrier for that right now is the regulator, right? Is the fact that I think the FDA and other regulatory bodies are not really convinced yet that the patient indeed is the intended user. How do you see that shaping out from a regulatory perspective? Do you think we'll see a breakthrough in that space in the coming years?
I think eventually it will take, this is a long-term trend, I think, but it could get there eventually. I think when there's clinical validation for it, it could eventually happen. But I think what will be key, which is the main stumbling block for the regulators now, is that it does need to be sort of overseen or supervised by some sort of medical professional. So yes, and even in the products you see on the market today, where it's more patient-led, it's still overseen by a medical professional. They need their permission to do it. So it's really about limiting patients scanning themselves and reaching a wrong diagnosis or assuming that, to have a negative clinical outcome. So it's really about that happening. And I think what's also needed, not just for the regulators, but I believe as a market as a whole, is the education into the value that ultrasound and also handheld ultrasound can have and its capabilities and how it can be used. I think that's one of the things that's limiting its increased adoption, not by patients at home, but just in the market as a whole. As that awareness of ultrasound and handheld ultrasound increases, that will sort of help start the journey towards ultrasound being used more in the home, obviously by patients and also by medical, different medical professionals being able to use it if they scan patients at home.
Yeah, I like what you said is maybe not thinking of the patient as the end-to-end intended user, but rather patient-led, meaning the patient is maybe physically holding the probe and you're using a variety of telehealth solutions to be able to provide real-time oversight, both for the image acquisition as well as for the image interpretation. And like you said, I think we're starting to see some novel use cases emerge, especially in areas where home health also has a little bit of a consumer angle, right? Whether it's like obstetrics, fertility, those are areas where I think we'll be able to see some initial throughput there. Do we have to move towards more of closed loop or like better defined use cases? Because I think you're right, like the regulators' kind of biggest nightmare is to say, hey, we're arming patients with like these super powered diagnostic devices, and they could come to a variety of misled conclusions or not trained necessarily to be able to make these calls. Whereas if you had more of a closed loop system that's focused on a specific indication or even just a measurement, not a diagnosis, that could maybe be better suited for a type of kind of this patient-led use cases. And maybe to explain what I mean, like let's look at a corollary from the electrophysiology market in the cardiac rhythm space, right? Where we now have, home devices like, for example, the Apple Watch and other monitors that the patient can wear, and using AI and technology, they're measuring a specific, it's kind of a yes-no monitor for a specific indication, like, for example, atrial fibrillation. It's not a full diagnostic device. An ECG can be a full diagnostic device, but the approved use is for a very, very narrow one that is kind of a binary output. Is this patient experiencing atrial fibrillation, yes or no? Do you think that could be that type of approach, or more of a closed loop system, single indication, could be applicable to this patient-led ultrasound scenario?
I think it will be, similar to what you said earlier about, the use of ultrasound sort of vary in the different clinical applications, and there's different needs depending on the area. I think it will also be similar in this instance. Maybe as you mentioned, so for something like obstetrics, there's not specifically one thing that's being monitored. It's more of a general, the whole view of the pregnancy of the womb as to what the situation is. So that will require a different sort of patient-led approach. Using AI, you do the series of sweeps, which, so commonly they do a series of sweeps. It takes the image and then the image can go to the doctor. Whereas for something like cardiology, where you might just be looking for a specific measurement. I mean, you're even seeing the development, not marketable yet, but, we may see that as well within the next decade or even soon of, ultrasound patches where the patient will wear it. it would monitor certain recordings, send it to the doctor, or, they can monitor it if there's an anomalous recording or it picks up something, it can notify the doctor who can then tell the patient to come in. Obviously keeping the patients out of the hospitals, making their life easier, giving them more time to focus on other things as well. So I think
so that's an interesting idea. Maybe not an image-based ultrasound output where the ultrasound is just recording a measurement, reporting on that, like a monitoring device.
Yeah.
Similar to a Holter monitor or maybe other kind of home-based monitoring devices where the ultrasound technology is acquiring signals that are ultrasound-based, but isn't necessarily providing an output of an image.
Yeah.
Either for the patient or for the physician to look at, but rather more of a measurement or an indication.
Yeah, I would say so. And in certain other areas, specific measurements. But I think I know you mentioned the Apple Watch. That could work, that would work. But I suppose the key thing is just making sure that there's some sort of oversight. So it's not just someone monitoring their own vitals with an Apple Watch, thinking that they're okay and maybe misinterpreting a result, or there may be an issue with the watch, or an issue with the result. So I think making sure that there's oversight by a medical professional is key.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And to your point, that will help to, again, lower the threshold that maybe the regulator will deem as a minimal bar, because there is kind of the human in the loop and a trained medical professional that's overseeing it. You mentioned AI a moment ago, and kind of as we talk about where's ultrasound going towards the tail end of our conversation today, what role do you think AI can play there? Is it about helping to improve the acquisition of images? We know that's not trivial with ultrasound. It requires quite a bit of proficiency. Is it about being better to analyze the results, for example, to be able to monitor conditions and perhaps provide a consistent measurement output? What role is AI going to play here?
So I think it's a combination of everything you mentioned, but it's interesting when you look at the two barriers of using ultrasound. You've mentioned them just now. It's the technical difficulties in obtaining an ultrasound image, and also the time and the expertise needed to actually analyze the images as well. And these areas where AI can overcome these barriers. It's by no means the only tool. There are other things that can be done as well, but it's a great tool to do that. And depending on which ones of the areas that you mentioned is most important, again, I think it just depends on the user of ultrasound. So for newer or less experienced users, they'll have great benefits from image guidance AI solutions that can help them acquire good quality cardiac images. And then there's also alongside AI solutions to help analyze the images. If for the more experienced or expert users, they may not have need for the image acquisition AI solutions because they know how to acquire good images.
Right.
They may not even need the AI solutions to help them analyze the images because they know how to do it. But those AI solutions can speed up the time it takes to analyze the images. And it can also reduce the interoperator variability in the measurements that might be taken. So it'll make their work more efficient. It'll almost standardize it across the work base. Even they can benefit from AI in that way. And I think we're starting to see that there's an increased acceptance of sort of image guidance, AI solutions and AI solutions for image analysis. And it's just slowly moving towards AI solutions for diagnostic support.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if the market is there yet, but it's slowly moving in that direction.
Definitely, we've seen, I think, a boom cycle in the last 5 years of AI and also AI and ultrasound. I think initially a lot of this industry of medical imaging AI was focused on X-ray and CT. Yeah. I think, that's also my background. But I agree. I think ultrasound has been catching on very quickly. But with such a large ecosystem of kind of standalone vendors, I think many have been struggling still to find an ROI proof point in terms of financial returns. Like you said, there's a lot of utility, whether it's to help streamline the acquisition of the images or to help automate the interpretation or perform measurements that an expert user can do themselves, but would choose not to because it's time consuming. Why has it been so tough for these companies to be able to monetize and kind of where do you see that going? Will there be like a standalone, cottage industry of vendors that are selling their own AI products? Will they become integrated into the modality vendors? Where do you think this will end up in terms of financial returns and viability of standalone AI products?
Obviously, the challenge for the standalone AI products is that a lot of times they may need to partner with an ultrasound vendor to market their solution. Especially if it's an image guidance AI solution, you need to have that integrated into a device, which can take time. It can be difficult. See the difficulties to it. And again, you may be in a better position. You may know more about this than me, but obviously partnering with AI vendors can then affect, the revenues that you can make on top of that, during the business arrangements you make. Also, what's interesting is that with new technology, when it's introduced, it's commonly introduced onto your most premium platform and then slowly trickles down. And that's not just in ultrasound, that's in everything. But what's interesting about AI, as we've mentioned before, there's a lot more value in these AI solutions from users of sort of the lower priced ultrasound card and compact systems and in handheld ultrasound. There's a lot more value there. And looking at handhelds in particular, the price has come down quite considerably, or the price is a lot lower compared to card and compact systems, let's say around $5,000. So AI vendors that are looking to make money or to obtain a good ROI within, through AI use and say handheld ultrasound systems, there's only so much you can charge. The customers will be willing to pay based on the cost that they're already paying for their ultrasound system. If they're paying, let's say $5,000 or $10,000 for an ultrasound system, they're not going to pay the same amount, or they may not want to pay the same amount just for AI solutions as well.
Maybe it's more of an enabling technology, which at some point acceptance has to be rolled up into the overall price of the solution, which is, I guess, not dissimilar to how we've seen it happen in many other spaces. I mean, you think about your phone is being powered by AI. It's got Siri, it's got Alexa, it does a lot of interpretation. You don't view that as an extra product, but rather as just an enabling technology. To interact with your phone or with your search engine.
Yeah. And also, customers will increasingly want these solutions to be sort of features of the system that they buy. So if it is integrated in, they expect it to be features, which again makes it difficult for AI vendors to make revenue from. And also, because ultrasound, AI in ultrasound is slightly behind compared to other modalities, so you'll know this from your history, some AI solutions are for specific measurements. And if you don't need, so as an example, say a specific cardiac measurement, which is very useful if you need that measurement. But if you've done that measurement and it's not, you haven't discovered what the issue is, and you need to do another scan or take another measurement, there's no AI for that. So that's one thing that's also been holding the AI market and ultrasound back, is that there's more specific solutions and not more generalized, comprehensive solutions. But the market is starting to move in that direction. We're starting to see more of these comprehensive solutions out there, as well as platforms offering, multiple solutions for customers as well.
A lot of that, from my perspective, has been driven by the stance of the regulator. By and large, AI by the FDA has been approved on an indication by indication basis. And that's why if you have a measurement for ejection fraction, it's a completely separate submission to get a measurement for strain or for HFpEF or for whatever other cardiac condition you might be evaluating. And that's, I think, been slowing down the industry. And I think that the FDA has been quite progressive in trying to work towards these kind of multi-finding type approvals. I think that's probably an area that we will see a breakthrough in the next several years. But certainly I can appreciate your view on the fact that, while AI is principally serving handheld and ultrasound, but because of the price point and willingness to pay, there isn't a lot of margin, so to speak, left for the AI solution, which probably is just, means it will accelerate commoditization. Not dissimilar. I used to run a PACS business, and I think not dissimilar to what we saw with 3D imaging in PACS, where, at first 3D was an add-on. You would buy like a standalone module to do 3D imaging for CT, for example. And then over time, it just became a standard feature of PACS because it had enterprise software for viewing CT images. You just had to have 3D, and it was just a feature as opposed to a standalone. I guess that happens with almost every technology. Bluetooth in cars is another one that used to be an add-on and now is, of course, standard. So very interesting view. Maybe just as we start to wrap up, I know that Signify, kind of from where you sit, you have broader access. You don't just look at ultrasound or just look at medical imaging. Mustafa, what are some of the trends broadly you're seeing in healthcare with kind of from your chair as a research analyst for one of the leading healthcare research firms?
Well, I think the big issue at the moment is the backlog of imaging procedures, which just sort of started during the COVID pandemic. And so that's one of the main issues that the vendors are looking to address in the market. It's the backlog of imaging procedures, also radiographer or burnout, more and more imaging with less and less time. So those are the real two factors that are impacting the market at the moment. And a more recent one with the energy crisis, there's a lot more interest now, not in ultrasound, but in some of the other imaging modalities into being more energy conservative. Vendors are now starting to develop approaches to their systems that sort of, are more energy conservative, so that their customers don't have to pay so much to do those imaging procedures.
I never thought about the energy bill of a hospital. I guess it's not insignificant.
Right.
With inflation, specifically in the energy market, that can become quite a burden. Generally, I was at a hospital conference just this weekend at the Federation of American Hospitals, and what I heard is that over 50% of hospitals in the US, at least, are in the red, meaning they're losing money, and therefore maybe many households are trying to rethink their cost structure and where can they optimize in order to gain some profitability. So I didn't think of energy as a factor there. Very, very interesting perspective. Mustafa, I've learned a lot today. Really great to get your view and just to hear through your background as a researcher coming now and taking a little bit of a broader lens of ultrasound and providing, I think, a very instructive perspective on where ultrasound is and also where it's going. If our audience wants to learn more about you and your work and more about Signify, where can they go?
So you can go to our website, www.signifyresearch.net. So you'll be able to see all of the research areas that we cover. And you can also see, the reports that we include and find out a bit more about our research process and a bit more about the rest of the team that work at Signify Research.
All right. I definitely encourage our listeners to check that out. Mustafa, I tremendously enjoyed speaking with you today, as always. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah. And to all of our listeners, we also appreciate the time together. Be sure to catch us on the next episode. That's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Medical Imaging for All podcast, brought to you by Clarius. If you enjoyed today's show, please do us a favor and leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. For the latest episodes, please visit www.clarius.com or search Medical Imaging for All on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next episode.